And we can move on to our next clientele session. We have a leaders discussion on the topic Playbook Accelerating Digital in a Crisis. To tell us more, I would like to introduce the chair for the next session, Pradeep Menon, Managing Director, HSBC Technology. Pradeep is Global Leader and Group Chief Technology Officer of HSBC Group's Data and Analytics Technology Function and MD of HSBC's Technology Centers in India. His role spans the wealth and private banking, commercial wholesale and the investment banking divisions of the bank globally, along with all regional banking entities. I now request Pradeep and the leaders to take the stage. Over to you, Pradeep. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Just to get started, I think I'm going to talk for the next 6 to 7 minutes about accelerating digital in a crisis and the playbook that we had around that. And then, of course, we're going to follow. I'm going to invite some esteemed panelists that I have, whom we're going to talk about what the next steps are and so on. Right. So with that, let's get started. Next slide. Thanks. HSBC as a banking brand is fairly well known. I think we've got a fairly big presence across the world. We are present in multiple countries. And the reason I talk about this right now is when the pandemic hit us, even though we were a very large bank in India, we've got a fairly sizable operation in the technology center and of course in the operation centers. We realized that we were facing something that we hadn't seen before. So if I could move to the next slide. Right. So the first thing, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of many of us here, when the initial few weeks of when the pandemic hit us, we weren't very sure if this was something, we had never seen something like it before. So we weren't very sure if it's going to last for 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 quarters, right? I mean, and as time has gone by, it's been nearly a year now, we all realize that it's been around for a lot longer than all of that, right? But in the initial days, we weren't very sure about how this has come, and we tried to sit down and say, okay, what is it that's actually priority for us? Now, being a technology center, one thing that we've always been very proud about has been the engineering brilliance that the technology centers have catered to. So we wanted to ensure that whatever we do, the engineering brilliance that we've been honing over the years remains constant. So that was key for us. We serve a lot of global customers out of our centers here in India, and I speak on behalf of most of the people in the GCC centers that customer centricity is very important for us. We realize that come what may, irrespective of what challenges the pandemic would throw at us, we didn't want to really change anything from that perspective, and customer centricity had to be really whole and centered for a lot of things that we did. So that was the second big thing. We were very sure that while our talent would hold hands with us and they'll be partners in actually navigating it, we wanted to make it as sensitive and as easy for them, because many of them and their families were also seeing change for the first time of this nature. So we realized that we've got to be there for them and ensure that they are part of, we take care of as many things as we could for them. So these were the 3 key tenets we realized in the initial days of the pandemic, saying, okay, we cannot really take away from that. With that, let me move on to the next slide. And what I wanted to talk about here was, and I'm going to start with the bottom part of the slide before I get on to the part on the top. We realized that transformation cannot change when you're faced with an emergency. I mean, that's always a little late in the day to start doing it. Over the years, we've had a digital transformation where we're running in, because we're an engineering organization, we of course measure ourselves on a lot of engineering parameters. In the same period, this is 2020 over 2019, we realized that code quality that was coming out of our centers had actually improved. The reduction in defects that we were targeting, that had actually shown a lot of improvement, right? Like some of the stats that I talk about here, like 64% more defects identified, the agility in terms of user stories delivered and incidents and outages that actually started coming down. This happened because some of the transformation edicts that we did from a digital transformation perspective, we had started early and we actually reaped good benefits of it. I think every year we've been coming to nasscom and talking about Shunya, which has been a platform that we worked on, and that reaped good fruit. And some of these numbers are testament to that. We also went ahead and ensured that from a technology enablement perspective, and here I do speak on behalf of many of us here in the GCC, right? I mean, tech enablement was key, ensuring that we were able to provide point of sale, the moments of truth when it comes to technology enablement to our colleagues across 40,000 employees that we have with HSBC here. 24/7 for DevOps engineering services. That ensured that we had far more software releases compared to 2019 and some of the stats below. When it came to communication with the pandemic, we hyper-communicated. And that was a conscious decision that we took. So it got to a point where in the initial days of the pandemic, we just realized that we've got to do this a lot more than we did. And I think it helped because most of us as organizations, and especially HSBC, we've always had a very healthy work from home environment. And we've had a certain percentage of our staff which is always working from home or from points away from their office. But to have 100% movement, and one was the technology enablement behind it, but also the people and the cultural aspects of keeping that going. We took that very seriously. So I think that was key. Enhanced the employee assistance plan that we had, provided home office assistance, virtual onboarding and exits. And again, some of this is a playbook for the industry. Many of us here from GCCs and even many other organizations have probably done that. But that brings me to the concept of customer centricity. Can I go to the next slide? And this is the one key slide that I wanted to talk about before we get on to the panel. We actually focused on the center in India, giving out solutions which made life easy for our global customers, right? And try to come up with ideas which actually made some of it. So for instance, we came up with, insurance was big in those days, in that period of the pandemic, and we had a cloud-based solution which had personalized scores, very easy, based on a single score that took into account physical, mental health, behavior, financial health, and so on. And again, everything that was that the customer had agreed to share with us. And that was a big help, I think, in certain geographies of the world where we released it. People didn't. I just saw the the cautionary message which says don't touch your face. You can imagine, you remember, and today while we have learned to live with the pandemic for about a year now, in the period of March and April for most of us here in India, you realize that was a period of uncertainty. We knew everywhere we were subject to all kinds of messages, but one thing was very sure is that we all agree that we had to have a zero touch environment, right, or as low touch as we could. And so that's when we came up with, in Singapore, we released a digital straight-through banking credit card. In 5 minutes, new to the bank customers could literally, in few minutes, right, 3 to 5 minutes, you could actually get your card activated. And that was a great, that was something that went on very well for us. We released a lot of new, on microservices architecture, we released 15 new digital services, which were hitherto, they were planned, but I think we released them seamlessly, and that again led to a lot of customer satisfaction in some of those areas. In commercial banking, there was a period where we reached out to some of our stressed customers, and they had issues with, you do know that lending can sometimes have a certain time stamp or time period the whole thing takes, but we kind of crashed that by using technology which we delivered from our India centers, and that was very customer centric, and again that gave us a fillip in the period of the pandemic to go ahead and do that. Again, we literally brought down credit decisioning time by about 75% for some of our customers. Same thing when it came to using new technology. An example is from our market and security services, where we released a first digital bond on the DLT frame, right, on the DLT platform, and that ensured that we reduced settlement time from about 5 days. It came down to about just about 2 days, right? So these are all global deliveries in terms of customer benefits that we offered from our centers here in India. And I do, I'm not saying that if there was no pandemic, we would not do it. But in spite of the pandemic, in spite of everything that period threw challenges at us, we definitely went ahead and delivered. And with that, I wanted to move on to the panel discussion, because this is just setting the preamble of what accelerating digital in the period of crisis was. And I would like to invite my panelists on board too. Thank you, Poornima and Balaji, for joining me. Poornima, of course, is the EVP for strategic clients with Qlik, and Balaji is the MD for engineering for Goldman Sachs. So thanks to both of you for joining me on board. Let me start with a question which is, again, just leading on from the conversation that I was just having. Poornima, let me start with you, right? What was your take on how the pandemic influenced your business and how the whole thing came together for Qlik? What's your take?
Sure. It was interesting. Pradeep, are you able to hear me, first of all?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. It was interesting, right? If you take a step back and something that you mentioned, for the first time, the entire world went into 100% BCP across the board at the same time. And technology and data was possibly the only, only that was the only fact and truth that we could all follow. So at Qlik, we were fortunate that we were already very geared towards work from home across the board, but it was never planned for 100% of work from home. So we already had VPN connectivity, so it could become easy, but we had to make sure that our technology backbone was resilient to be able to support 100% of work from home. And more importantly, make sure people were comfortable, right, with this change in culture. And all of that came out very clearly during the pandemic. So frequent communication was very helpful. Uh, Transparent communication was very helpful, and making sure it was not just only about the technology, but comfort from a people perspective. And we saw this play out across our customer base as well, right? In fact, several of our customers who are based in India actually very quickly moved to this 100% work from home. They were able to do that because they had a technology backbone and a need, and the investments from a digital and data perspective. It was amazing what we saw across the board. Customers like LTTS, Cognizant, Hsbc. It was very impressive how everyone adapted to it and the community really came together.
Thanks, Poornima. Balaji, what's your take on it?
Yeah, if you look at our core business, Pradeep, which is investment banking, deals are made through relationships, through FaceTime conversations, and it's a pretty kind of an intensive process of travel, right? If you roll back in April and May, where, like as Poornima was saying, it was like 100% remoteness, and it was also the period where a lot of industries, particularly in leisure and travel, for example, most of our clients actually required capital to strengthen their financial positions, basically, right? And what that meant was they had to do issuances, and we as banks, we go with our clients to potential investors, do roadshows, and actually kind of get the deal happen. And it's usually like a 2 to 3 week of effort before you actually kind of hit either the deal date or the issuance date, basically, right? Now, what it meant when everyone was remote is we had to do this completely differently. It was all virtual. And that's one of the first things that, in the month of April and May that we had to do. And we did a first high yield bond deal in May, end to end, completely virtual, from the origination to the sales to the trading. And that was the first of its kind. And that actually set the path for more and more of our clients coming in and actually kind of looking for capital, basically. So it was really a kind of a path-breaking moment to kind of get all this done in a very short span of time.
Great. And let me stay with you then. And another question that this just comes from the conversation that we had a few days ago, Balaji. You also spoke about this interesting thing about how you feel that organizations have come together during this period to help the larger cause. The impact to the community, the impact to NGOs, and so on. So again, that's very interesting things. I think we should share that.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I think we all saw is that as corporates, we all came together to kind of help the governments, the various medical services, through various means, basically. And also, one of the things that we saw globally and locally is also individuals, people in my teams. Can I actually kind of, there are a couple of examples of apps on geospatial technology, for example, that can connect elderly people in an area with actually people who want to volunteer to kind of get groceries for them. That was one part. On the more larger scale side, I think one of the things that we actually kind of saw where as engineers and as the data that was coming in, it had just started coming in. You could potentially start seeing some patterns in it. And we had kind of working with some hospitals, globally. One of the things that we saw was there are patterns around admissions to particular hospitals and a full kind of a cycle of the ICU beds, the number of ventilations that you actually kind of require. And we saw some patterns which meant that we could put in some models there so that like if I am someone who is logistically actually taking care of, I have only X number of ventilators and I need to distribute it across Y hospitals for the next foreseeable, like for a month or so, how do I actually most optimally do it?
Right.
And so that's an area where, it was interesting that some of the models that we do on our kind of internally for financial services, you could potentially kind of extend that and you could use it for these kind of purposes as well. And that actually kind of made a quite a big difference. The other one was also, you always have data, but it's more about the curating it and actually kind of giving a perspective to it. And that was actually kind of required by both like the public as well as some of the leadership in the, be it on the government services, be it on the medical services as well. So like things like what are the hotspots? Like, how does my area look like? So these are actually aggregated data that is with all the kind of the privacy aspects taken into account, you could potentially kind of render it actually. And that's another area where, these are things we do, it's more of a day job that we do internally, and we could use the same engineering methodologies and actually kind of take it out there.
No, and that's a very interesting insight, because even if I were to reflect back on our own journey on CSR last year, we just realized that in the initial couple of months, of course, life was a little difficult given the clampdown and the sheer ferocity of some of those clampdowns. But one thing that really played out towards the later half of the year was, how well people actually believed that you've got to stand for something bigger than what you were doing. And in fact, that's all the org cause, right? And they banded together. And whenever they were faced with issues, I realized that, people in India, especially in the country, are very enterprising. So they find solutions to the problems that they face. And I think that's something that we're very proud about, right? So thanks for bringing that up, Balaji. Poornima, moving on to you, one of the things that you come from a reputed product organization, right? So it is in your mandate to go work with multiple organizations and solve. So how have you, how have you helped them navigate? Because the topic here is about accelerating digital. So how have you seen other industries accelerate digital in your experience in this space?
So I'll take a cue from something that Balaji mentioned about how the community came together and share a few examples, right? So Asian Development Bank is basically a bank that's helping overall the Asian countries deal with economic situations and plan for economic future. And the Asian Development Bank actually was looking to understand the impact of the pandemic and how to help Asian countries navigate the pandemic itself. So Qlik actually worked with ADB to, first of all, do a lot of data navigation and what if scenarios. In fact, that was the biggest ask that we saw from across customers. What if scenarios with real-time data, because it's not like you can rely on the past. This is something that we've all faced possibly in our lifetime for the first time. There's no playbook for how to navigate this. So everyone wanted to know what actually is happening and what they should be thinking about. And data was the only guiding force, if you may, to navigate. So ADB, wanted to understand that what if analysis, where the hotspots are, understand which countries need what kind of help and what's going to be the path for helping them navigate this. But more importantly, also looking for solutions from the community. So in fact, we've set up a challenge with ADB on, as the vaccine distribution is now becoming available, to see how can we make sure that vaccine is available for the right populations, what's going to be any kind of downside effect of the vaccines, to be able to track all of that. And ADB themselves are not going to be able to find solutions for all of these challenging issues. So they've created a challenge platform, and Qlik is helping them set this up so that the community can come together to solve for these challenges using data. The second thing that we saw across the board is the need for data literacy, because this is not just something where corporate officers can actually sit and decide what needs to be done. Data needs to be available at in every part of the organization, in everyone's hands for operational decisions. So the demand for data literacy across the board, across employee segments, actually increased rapidly. And I believe, it accelerated almost 2 to 3 years, according to even Gartner and Forrester and so on and so forth. So the demand for real-time data increased, the demand for data literacy increased, multifold, and the demand to know actually how to do what if analysis, not just descriptive analytics in the analytics genre, but more predictive analytics as well became very critical. Because no AI models had modeled for this kind of a 100% BCPA and lockdown. So you couldn't rely on past models. You had to rewire them quickly for what we were seeing, right? So a lot of that engineering talent also became a big need across the board.
Yeah, and on this topic of bringing up engineering talent, one of the things that we navigated, talking about from the talent engine, was ensuring that you lent a hand out to all your workforce, right? So I'm sure you face very similar similar situations in terms of how Qlik would have come together. So again, what Balaji? Let me get to you on this, and then I'll come back to you, Poornima. Balaji, how did you take on the people aspects of accelerating, like the people aspects of managing digital and the changes that come with that in this period, right? How did it work for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Pradeep, because it kind of worked both ways basically. So there were, of course, because of like the local proximity and the team together, there were kind of challenges around that, like the fact that they are now kind of remote, right? But we also had a positive aspect to it, where because everyone is remote, like particularly where teams are geographically spread, the leadership is geographically spread, right? The access was leveled out actually. So what that meant was that proximity no longer was a constraint to what you can and cannot do. And this is like, as GCCs, I think this is a very key thing from an India standpoint, which is basically you could now do anything from here because the remoteness is no longer a constraint for you basically. So that's something that, and many of my team members felt that access, the daily access that you get from a global standpoint was much more compared to what it was before. And this is a permanent change. So you are no longer on audio calls, you're always going to be on a video call. So that effectively means that it's a new culture that actually has kind of set in, right? So that's one part to it. There's another part to it, which we actually kind of have done, which we just accelerated it basically, is that traditionally our kind of talent program has always been go to campuses and actually kind of get the talent back. We have been working through a completely digital campus program, which effectively means that it's all done remotely. And the one thing that we actually kind of saw, and which we are actually we ran it last July and we are again running it this year, which is we opened it up pan-India. Now, and what that actually kind of meant was, and this is, we had some really interesting ones where, somebody in Mizoram, somebody in Kashmir, somebody in on the western side, like they have equal access to our the way we actually recruit. So they come in, they give the test. There's enough governance around it. And what that meant was the diversity of talent. We are tapping areas where we would not have done before because we were always focused on going to a specific set of campuses basically. So that's a big game changer for us basically.
That's right. You allude to one of the endearing qualities, if I could use that word, for the pandemic has been the pandemic has also taught us a lot of new things. I think a lot of relatively oft-held beliefs which we had in corporate life, they've probably given way, right? One has been the sheer access to talent, as you rightly said. I think we are not limited in that, right? I think we've got more access. And of course, we have also learned that certain things which we have held most strongly in the past in terms of ways of working and modes of working, they probably don't need to be done in that manner, right? So it's interesting insight. When it comes to talent, when it comes to processes, when it comes to relationships, we've been working from office for a year now. And we've been working from home for a year now, and we still haven't. It's interesting to see how relationships still remain very strong, and some of those things that we've navigated. So thanks for that. Poornima, going to you. What's your take on this topic?
So I'll talk about access and sharing from a data perspective. So what we saw is previously industries used to be very closed to the idea of sharing data itself, but with the pandemic, not only did the community come together, but organizations actually started opening up to see what kind of useful data that they had that other industries could benefit out of, right? Or even certain analytics that you've possibly done, especially say around people. around care analytics. How do you take care of your employees? How do you help organizations navigate people's wellness as such, right? But that was the biggest trend that we saw that I believe is here to stay, where financial services organizations were willing to share data that they believed that the community could benefit out of. Healthcare organizations were willing to look at data, of course, non-personal data, but that could help the entire community navigate the pandemic. Hotspots, understanding what to avoid, where to avoid, and good practices, and so on and so forth, and even techniques, right? If just technology techniques. So we ran this program called Customers Helping Customers, and we had customers actually saying, "Hey, I had this challenge with this piece of technology when I was trying to do my what-if analysis or when I was trying to do my predictive analytics." And they were actually willing to start collaborating with each other to solve for these problems together, right? So the culture in the community really came out strongly. And the last is also so much of creativity. If there was a roadblock, then how do you actually figure out different ways for finding new types of data, tapping new types of data to get answers to it?
Yeah.
Right. So I think there were very less boundaries in terms of that thinking and creativity. People were willing to reach out to each other within the organization, across organizations, across countries as such, to be able to solve for, previously unseen problems as such.
Right, and I think I'm going to take one last topic that I want to discuss, and there is something that that actually came up today morning, and I was talking to somebody, and they came back and said, we're talking about the pandemic, and we're talking about how it, and they asked me this question, saying, what have we learned from it in terms of, how's our readiness to meet another pandemic? Let's hope it never happens again. But what's our readiness to meet something of this scale again, right? And I just realized that the same question asked. Might be in March last year or Feb last year, it would be difficult to imagine that this was the kind of change that was lying ahead, and that thrust, and might be that answer would have been a little bit more wishy-washy in terms of, I think we're sure or not. But I feel a lot more, I've just having gone through this, and I'm sure it is, I speak on behalf of most organizations, I think they're a lot stronger in our ability to be resilient in this change, and the ability to keep a customer focus on, the ability to keep our digital focus on, to keep our people focus on. And I think that's generally worked well. Poornima and Balaji, probably 30 seconds each from both of you. Would you agree? What's your take on that topic? How prepared do you see yourselves in your context to take on the challenge again? Let's hope not in the same nature, but if something comes our way.
I can go first. The first thing, you're right. I think a lot of the learnings are going to help us be ready for the future. The biggest thing is our willingness to adapt and move quickly, right? It's just that we were not stuck in the way we had done things, but everyone pivoted to seeing what's required for the day and not looking for and becoming more self-reliant and willing to give a lending hand. That's here to stay. And the second thing I'd say from a digital and data perspective is data literacy. The amount of, so we are a part of NASSCOM's initiative for future skilling, and the amount of demand we've seen for data and analytics upskilling is amazing. So that's here to stay, which means it speaks well for the future from a digitization, from an agility, from a data skills perspective in decision making itself, right? So I believe those are good, strong foundations on top of the resilience that you spoke about, and the culture of togetherness is also here to stay.
Fantastic. Balaji, your take on it?
Yeah, it's data and digitization. I feel that what the last 10 months has taught us is, this is what the foreseeable future is actually kind of going to be. The other thing, the one key learning that we have is also the fact that what we traditionally used to hold back is no longer there are things that we have done which we would not have done a year ago or a year and a half ago. I think that's the other part too, is like when there are new ideas, when there are things that are coming on this thing, I think we should take a much more kind of wider picture, because it could become quite relevant in the next kind of this thing, right? So that's the other part. I think it's a very good learning for us.
Thanks to both of you, Poornima and Balaji. It was a great chat. Thanks again for your time.
Sure.
So we'll catch up soon. Yeah. Thank you, NASSCOM, for having us. It's great indeed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, panelists. Adaptability, transitions, disruption, of course, all a day in the life of technology and change driven by it. And thank you, Pradeep, for picking up minds of these leaders and making us understand as to how global financial technology organizations are enabled and accelerated innovation happens to meet their customer needs in a rapidly changing global environment. Ladies and gentlemen, so many takeaways from that segment. With that, we want to leave you with this thought of ensuring that when you think about technology, think in terms of a lot of these contexts that were just shared.